love a good beaded rope. You might have guessed that since I wrote a whole book about beaded ropes. But Dutch spiral is one that actually did not make it into the book, and it's also one of my favorites because I love how light and airy the spirals look as you go along. And that's something that makes it a little different from a lot of other spiral ropes. Most other spiral ropes are fairly solid, and this one has kind of these light fluffy spots in it. Let me show you the difference between a Dutch spiral and a Cellini spiral, because people get this confused. I noticed when I was looking at some ropes online recently that people were referring to what is actually a Cellini spiral as a Dutch spiral. And here's the difference between the two. In a Cellini spiral, these lavender beads here are all kind of loose and not stitched in. They're all stitched in one big loop, and so it's not like you're stitching them in one at a time. And that's what gives it that open, airy kind of effect. That's what makes it an actual Dutch spiral. In a Cellini spiral, which is what this is, it has a little bit of a similar look to it, but every single bead is stitched in. And so it's much more solid. There's no loosey-goosey spots like you get with the Dutch spiral. So that's what the difference between the two is. Interestingly enough, they're just fancy names for a peyote spiral. All you're doing is these are variations on a peyote spiral rope. Right this second, I'm going to concentrate on our Dutch spiral. You're going to notice that there are sections where it looks more like the Cellini. These guys are actually stitched in one at a time. That gives us kind of that spine section. And then we have one segment here where it's just all loose. Here's how we're going to start it out. You're going to have an array of different sizes of seed beads. It doesn't actually have to be all different sizes, but I think that it adds to the visual appeal of the whole thing. I'll kind of pop this in the top here so you can, actually we'll leave it popped in the bottom so you can kind of see it. Let's hope I don't catch on it too much. I just like the visual appeal it gives, but this is by no means the only way that you can make a Dutch spiral. You can make it so this stitched in section is much wider. You can use a lot more beads to make it much wider. You can take these loops and make them much smaller or make them much bigger and drapier. So you have lots of options with a Dutch spiral. I'm just kind of going to show you the basics, and I'll show you where you can make your variations. So the way I'm going to start mine out is by picking up a fire polish, a size 8, a size 11, a size 11, and one more size 11. So one of each of the beads that I have here. I'm going to leave myself about a 4 to 6 inch tail below them, so that just enough so that I can weave it back in later. I'm going to pass from the bottom back up through all of the beads. And that still doesn't turn them into a circle. You kind of get this little half loop thing. So I'm going to keep going around and pass through that fire polish one more time. So now we've got this into a circle, and that's what it's going to look like here on the tip. What I'm going to do with this Dutch spiral is I'm going to taper up. You're going to notice here on the ends, I've got one of these lavender, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and I tapered up until I had a total of 10 beads in this loop. So that helps you attach a clasp more easily to have it smaller. So to start this out, I'm just going to pick up another one of the beads that I am coming out of. So in this case, it's a fire polish. And I'm going to force it in between the fire polish and the next bead. So this is like an increase. I'm coming out of a size 8, so I'm going to pick up a size 8, force it between the 8 and the next bead. Same thing here. I'm coming out of this dark matte purple. I'm going to force it in between those guys. I've got the bright shiny purple. And then here's the only thing that's going to be different. So this is going to be the start of our loose loop. So I'm going to pick up this bright shiny purple and then 2 of the lavenders. because I did one on the first, so there's two. and I'm going to skip over the lavender because that's going to be loose. I'm skipping over this first fire polish, and I'm going all the way over to the second fire polish. And notice that I'm kind of trying to encourage those ones that I just kind of forced in there to sit upward a little bit. I want them to be, they're a little bit sticky outy, and I want them to start growing upward. So the rule of thumb with a Dutch spiral is that the bead that you're coming out of is the next bead that you're picking up. And that can be surprisingly difficult to remember. So remind yourself over and over again, because visually you're looking at the next bead you're going to be going through, and sometimes your brain wants to pick up that next bead. But it's the one that you're actually coming out of that you're picking up. And this is going to be true forever and ever all the way to the end of the spiral. So I'm passing through the next sticky outie of the 8s. I'm coming out of an 8. So I'm picking up an 8, passing through the sticky outie purple, coming out of the purple, so I'm picking up a dark purple, passing through the sticky outie bright shiny purple, and then this is my wing, or the loose section. So I'm coming out of that bright shiny purple, picking up one of those, and then this time 3 of the lavenders. And then again, I'm going to pass over this first fire polish and go right over to the sticky outy one. And this is it, guys. This is what you're going to be doing. So it's really that simple. Pick up a fire polish, go through the next sticky outy. If it helps you to think of it, if the sticky outy is hard for you to see, what you can do is count. So you're, instead of going through the first of the next 2 beads that you see, you're going through the second one, the farthest one away, because your new bead is going to sit on top of the first one. So coming out of a dark purple, I'm picking up a dark purple, going through not the first but the second of the shinies. And then here's my next loose loop where I'm picking up a shiny and 4 lavenders. And flying all the way over to the next fire polish. And it's the sticky outy fire polish. So you're just going to keep doing this and increase until you have 4 of those lavenders. I'm sorry, until you have 10 of those lavenders in your loose loop here. And at that point, you're just going to keep going with the 10s until you get to the length that you desire. You want to take into account the fact that you're going to taper down at the other end. So when you do your first tapering up, you might want to measure that when you get to the point where you have finished and got to your 10. Go ahead and measure that and know that you're going to have to add that on to the other side later. So some of the places that you can change things up are, instead of having this number of seed beads in your stitched section, you can change what size they are, or you can change how many there are. And then certainly you can change how many there are in your loose loop. If this is a little too fluffy for you, you can bring it down, say stop at 5 or 6 if you wanted to. You can make one that's really, really quite dramatic and big and loose by going up to a higher number in that loose drapey section. So when we come back, I'll talk about how you're going to attach your clasp to this. Okay, so now you've spiraled and spiraled and spiraled around and you're ready to put your clasp on. So let's take a look at how to do that. Remember how I said that you're going to need to take into account the tapering effect on both ends for your length. The other thing you're going to need to take into account is what kind of clasp you use. So in this particular case, the clasp that I have here, that's probably adding about 1/2 inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch. Let's see, I could actually measure it. I have a handy dandy paper ruler here. And so the clasp is taking up about 3/4 of an inch. By the time you take into account, see these little seed beads that are coming from straight off from the end, and then I've got this little fire polish here. That is all part of your clasp closure. So I'm actually going to take that into account also when I'm measuring this. So that actually takes it to about 1 1.1 inches. So whatever your tapering is, in my case, it looks like I finished tapering right about here. So my tapering was another, looks like 7/8 of an inch. So 7/8, 7/8, and 1 1/8. And I need to subtract all of that, and that would give me the amount of what I needed here for all the stitches that I did the size 10s for. Or it's not the size 10s, when I counted 10 in these loops. The other way, of course, to measure this is just to kind of do a little bit of a wrist test. And in my case here, this one actually doesn't fit me quite. It almost does, but not quite. And what I would have done here is kind of eyeballed, know roughly what my clasp was going to add to it. And I basically want about 1 inch or 1.5 inches for that clasp for ease. So I can kind of usually eyeball it and get it close. And then you can always, if you ended up making it too short, you can add some extra embellishment beads here between your rope and the clasp. So that's that part. Let's go ahead and talk about the other thing that I haven't talked about is how to add an end thread, because you will have to do that in this piece as well. So I've got this thread attached here, and we're just going to pretend that this thread is too short and I'm ready to end it off. What I like to do is, if you're going to continue your rope and you know that you need to keep adding more beads, I actually start my new thread first so that I can make sure that I have it coming out the same bead in the same direction that my old thread is before I end off this old thread. The other way to do that, and I do this quite frequently, is I will finish adding a bridge. I go through the fire polish to add that bridge, and then I will end my rope off, because I know that's just if I do it the same every time, then I know that when I add my new thread on, as long as I have it coming out the fire polish, I'm ready to start again. So that's your other option, is to kind of pick a notable bead, and in my case the fire polish is the biggest one, so that's why it's my notable one, and I will always end it off in the same spot. Here, I just happen to be over here, so I'm going to go ahead and end it off here. Because I'm in this loop, actually, we're going to go across the loop with this thread and bring it back over to the fire polish guys, because I do think it is a good. Okay, so we're going to say that this is where I want to actually end this off. So what I do is I just weave back and forth in these beads, and I usually just keep in my fire polish and my size 8. So I keep in my larger size beads so that I can have those multiple passes of threads without causing a problem. And what I want to do is make sure that my thread is sitting along these intersections between the beads and not crossing over, so that you don't see a whole bunch of thread. So right here, this is where the intersection is. If I want to pop from here, now I want to reverse direction and come down a couple of size 8s, 2 or 3. Then I want to reverse direction again, so I'm going to come back up, let's say 2 fire polish. I'll bring it back across, and this is how I make sure that I'm lined up in the right bead, is I will frequently just kind of pull my thread over and go, okay, that's the line right there, so that I know that which size 8s I want to go through, and go down another 3 or 4 there. I have now changed directions 3 times in this, so I should be good at this point, and I can just cut that thread off. When you go to add thread, you'll do it the exact same way, which is how I added a new thread on this other end. I just started out in the fire polish here and went up a couple, came down a couple, went up, did that same kind of circling back around, and brought it all the way up to where I'm coming out of that very first fire polish on the tip of the end. Okay, so this is how we're going to actually add our clasp. I'm going to pick up 3 size 11 seed beads. It does not matter what color you pick because you've got several size 11 colors in your piece, so this is a design decision. You can pick whichever one you want. And then I like to pick up a fire polish bead before I start attaching my clasp end, and here's why. In most toggle clasps, you don't have a very long bar here. It is usually the loop is attached directly to the bar. So, and you need to be able to get a toggle bar up through the clasp enough so that, and see how when I'm pulling it up, part of this little tab, the little end of your bracelet has to come up through that hole so that you can get this bar all the way out and secured. And what I discovered when I did the first version, let me show you here. I've got variations of the clasp because I kept changing it every time I made it. This one ended up being really tight and hard to do, and that's because all I did was add seed beads here. I didn't add that extra fire polish. And so what happens is this gets too bulky really fast. It's not skinny enough here at the end. And so I can get it on, but it's not easy. It takes a little bit of maneuvering and stuff, and especially when you're trying to put it on yourself, it can be more difficult. So on version 2.0, that's where I added the little decorative fire polish, which now gives me enough elongation here to be able to add that toggle bar and make it really functional. Of course, if you're using some other kind of clasp, that doesn't make, that's not as big of a deal. You don't have to use the little fire polish. But for this, because I'm going to use that toggle, I do need that. It's good if you use the needle that actually is attached to the project, not the one that's not attached to anything. Okay, so let's see here. Pick up 3 of the seed beads and the fire polish. And then I'm going to just pass through the end of the bar here and then back through the fire polish in the opposite direction. And then I'm going to create another little leg. So I'm picking up another 3 seed beads. And I want to attach this in the bead that's opposite this fire polish. So in this case, it's a dark, you can see it just barely here, it's the dark matte purple that's directly across from the fire polish. And I'm coming out on what for me is the right-hand side of the fire polish. So I'm actually going to go in on the left side, kind of create a little figure 8 action here of that dark blue. Now I'm going to actually create another little set of legs here. So I'm going to pick up 3 more seed beads, come back up through the fire polish, through the hole on the toggle, back down through the fire polish, and then I just need 1 more set of legs here. Let's see if we've got 3 more beads sitting here, which is exactly what we have. 1, 2, 3. And so you can see where I've got the 3 attached on this side of the fire polish, so I need to attach 3 more on the opposite side. There we go. So you can see I've got a set here, I've got a set here. On the flip side, I've got a set here and a set here, coming out both sides of that little one opposite the fire polish. So then, because this is a clasp, I do suggest that you reinforce all of these legs if possible at least 2 more times. I like to have 3 passes of thread through here. So it's just as simple as just following the thread path, going back down through that fire polish every time. Kind of keeping track as much as you can of where that's going. And then, let's see, that guy was, aha, there we go. He's coming from this one. And then once you have finished your reinforcement, you'll just do the back and forth down a couple of these columns, just the way you added an ended thread, and that will finish off your bracelet. Do the same thing on the other side, and you're ready to go. Now I've got kits available for you in a couple different colorways, both in bracelet and necklace on my website at jillwiseman.com. So if you want this all just kind of handed to you in a handy dandy package, I can do that. And in the meantime, I hope you have a good time figuring out your own Dutch spirals too. Happy beading.